and thank you for joining us Behind the Science, where we connect you with the Eurofins network of testing labs and more broadly with the science of food testing from the viewpoint of the scientists themselves. This episode's guest is Rafael Davila, Business Unit Manager of two Eurofins Microbiology Labs in Salinas, California and Yuma, Arizona. The conversation today aims to provide you with a personal account of our guest. If the topic raises a question for you, feel free to reach out to us using the questions link and we'll follow up with you directly. All right, I'll now pass this over to our host, Eurofins Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Doug Marshall. Doug?
Thank you so much, Scott. It's really an awesome pleasure to get just a piece of Rafael's time because this is a busy season for him. Not that any other time during the year isn't busy, but having to run two laboratories simultaneously with hot and cold seasons is really a challenge. So really looking forward to learning more about Rafael and the kinds of things that occupy his time for our customers. With that, Rafael, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your background and how you wound up in this role.
Absolutely, Doug. Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to this conversation. A little bit about myself. So I'm Rafael Davila, as Scott mentioned. I'm the business unit manager of two sites, but I also support all sites nationally with any type of produce accounts, produce questions that they might have, whether that's outdoor agriculture, indoor agriculture, just support the overall segment. A little bit about myself. I've been working in agriculture, specifically leafy greens, for the last about 13 years now, and mainly focused on farm, but have slowly integrated into facilities. But I started really on the farm. So driving tractors, pulling weeds, kind of working my way through harvesting, understanding harvests, all the way through organic certifications to then packing houses, how to pack product, chop product. And then I took a leap into the processing world where we would actually wash and bag it. And then, kind of ended my career there and switched into this laboratory role. And I would say in parallel to that, I also had a entrepreneur gear kind of turning in parallel to my career pattern. And I started a small business, which was tissue sampling or field sampling for farmers, which kind of carried me, that reputation kind of carried over from internship that I did early on, where I was going out pulling tissue samples and delivering those to a laboratory for a grower. As that trend towards food safety and field testing kind of grew, that reputation kind of stuck with me, and people started asking me to do that outside of their normal business operation and more as a service. So I started a small sampling business about 10, maybe 8 years ago, and then slowly vertically integrated into somehow owning a full-blown laboratory, which then was acquired by Eurofins. So that's kind of been my background, my career path these last 13 years, more or less. And now I'm here with the Eurofins team, continuing to grow this produce segment.
Wow, that's really cool. I ran out of fingers all the jobs you've done in this sector. So I'll just ask you this question, tongue in cheek, by the way. Have you ever planted a seed and it never grew?
Yep, pretty good one there. Yes, the answer is yes, Doug.
Oh, okay. Well, it doesn't look like that's the case because everything you've had your fingers in has been turned to I'll say gold, but more likely a leafy green somewhere. So
There you go.
that's awesome. And so quite a diverse sort of background that you have. And maybe for our listeners, can you describe the current test portfolio that you and your laboratory support?
Yeah, so what we see day in, day out at our lab is everything around farming. So we'll start with the water sources that come in. So all the water sources that are used to irrigate a crop, wells, canals, reservoirs. We'll get samples from a farm that we test for coliforms, E. coli. Some more adventurous groups are doing some pathogen work on it, more for research purposes. We also do product testing. So before the crop gets harvested at the farm, they'll come in a couple days prior to harvest, bring us tissue samples. So they'll go to a farm, collect a specific pattern, bring in leaf samples to the lab, and they're looking for a rapid turnaround time to get a STEC, a salmonella, on a 375-gram tissue sample. What's starting to become more popular is listeria testing at the pre-harvest level to open up some of the supply chain availability post-harvest. So they're doing it pre-harvest now. So that's a ticking trend as well. And then we also do everything around the facilities that are used to process that product. So environmental swabs, wash water, and we're doing some post-harvest or finished product testing. So after it's cut, before it gets washed, some people are testing for pathogens as well as the pre-harvest crops, so stecks, salmonella, listeria. And then on the finished product level, they're also adding on stec, salmonella, listeria, and some indicators as APC or EC to that test as well. So that's kind of what we see day in, day out, 6, 7 days a week here at our labs.
Okay. So the industry has not had a glowing record for probably 20 or so years due to outbreaks and recalls. So a lot of what you're doing is trying to make sure the farmers get a return on their investment, but also making sure that the further processors are getting good quality and safe materials in their facilities and ultimately onto the consumer's table. So that's a pretty tall order, but a really important one for the industry and an important one for the consumer. So that's very cool. So you got a diverse portfolio of tests that your laboratories perform. Do you have one or two that you think just are really difficult to perform at the bench, and maybe some of the reasons why that may be?
Yeah, I would say kind of what we focus our operation around when we talk about volume coming through the lab, it's really around those 375-gram tissue samples, which I'll start there because it's a pretty big sample size compared to what others may be testing at 25 grams or 125 grams. It's just a really big sample to then add a lot of media to it. So tissue samples in general at 375, you're adding either a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 ratio of media. That's 1.5 liters to 3.8 liters, so almost two full soda cans, 2-liter soda cans that we're adding to one sample. So just the physical processing of a big 375-gram sample is an obstacle because you got to have the media for it, you got to have the space for it in incubation, and then you got to be able to handle it without tipping over 2 or 3 of these big size bins. So carts, walk-ins, that's always helpful at the lab. And then, yeah, keeping traceability on all those samples. We get quite a bit of volume on 375s, and the urgency of getting these results from clients. They want to drop it off 5, 6 p.m. at night, and they want results by 8 a.m. in the morning. So that urgency carries forward with how fast we got to process them and have everything ready. So when those samples do hit the door, we get the results as fast as we can to the client. So I know we've been kind of segmented as a rapid lab, even though microbiology is pretty fast in general, but that's kind of the urgency that we have here day in, day out. And it doesn't stop 7 days a week. I mean, we have kind of veered off of Sundays to ask our clients, to give us a day of not receiving samples. We still process any PCR work Sundays, but we like to use Sunday as a catch-up day, get our lab cleaned up, detailed clean, sanitized, get all caught up on media, decon dishes, and then get ready to hit the week on Monday uh, pretty aggressively for that full week. So Sundays we do try to take a little bit of pause, but during transition points, which we could speak to later on, it becomes difficult, and then it becomes a full 7-day operation.
Wow. So a lot of people who are in the industry, they are really looking for a quick test that they can perform in the field, and what you just described is anything but performing these in the field, because we are looking for a needle in a haystack, and that's why we need such a large sample size and a big lab to be able to handle that kind of throughput. So very cool. From that portfolio, then I'll just switch it on to the customer side. What is the most challenging test for a customer to order?
Yeah, great question. So historically, Listeria wasn't a test that got added on to product testing. It was more known in processing facilities through an environmental sponge. But in the last, I would say, 3 years, I'd say in the last 5 years, it started trending to more Listeria testing on product. And in the last 3 years, one specific buyer took a hard stance in incorporating this pathogen into their program. And it's been a difficult challenge. So Listeria testing on product, especially if it's post-harvest, which is the closest point to the buyer themselves and or the consumer. They wanted industry to start pulling a product after it's been harvested, processed, and cooled, take out a subsample of that and test it for Listeria. And in some of my conversations with our clients, when this rule was implemented by some of the buyers, one buyer specifically, um, it put their infrastructure of their operations in a little bit of a bind. So one example he gave me is he had about 40% availability in cold storage space before this requirement came out because they could test it for Steck and Sal, which is a 10 to 12 hour test, plus or minus 2 hours, I always say, for reporting and some of the other quality checks. But when they added Listeria to the test, that's almost a 24-hour plus or minus 2 hours more on the plus side to just sit in incubation for a longer period of time because it's a slower growing organism. And then to get all the quality checks and reporting done, it ends up being a 24 to 26-hour test. So when you put that in the framework of having to cut it, wash it, and then keep it cold, keep that cold chain for that product, and then test it, going from 10 to 12 hours to 24 to 26 hours really put a hurdle in a lot of our clients' operations, meaning that they would have to go secure more. So all that extra availability they had for cold storage space then went negative, right? Then they had to go outsource more cold storage capabilities just to hold product for this specific test. So Listeria, whether it's species or monocytogenous, was a real difficult task for the industry to adopt, but it's been working well. And like I said, some people have been getting creative to incorporate that in their pre-harvest test to buy them a little bit more of an opportunity if it's a field direct product.
Yeah, and it's kind of tough with Listeria because its normal habitat is dead and decaying vegetation, and that stays wet. And that is a lettuce field is a perfect example of an environment that has those characteristics. So if a pre-harvest test comes back positive for one of the pathogens or an indicator that's out of spec, what does the farmer do?
Well, first thing they do is get upset. They want to understand why, because depending on who they're growing for, it doesn't always translate to equal as one positive equals one section of the field. Sometimes that whole field gets condemned of being able to harvest. So, their first reaction is to try to understand a little bit more. So they get frustrated with the presumptive. They ask a little bit of questions. And I think that's been crucial to how we've entered market is having more transparent conversations. And it's been exciting to see in the 3 years we've been in market here in the Salinas Valley, those conversations have turned from an angry phone call right away to more of like, hey, let's understand it. What do the CTs look like? Was it strong? Was it weak? What options do I have? Where, historically it was just cultural confirmation. That was a 5 to 7 day process on STEC, sometimes longer. And they didn't have that time, right? That crop could turn in 3 days. If it's a hot summer and that presumptive hits, you could lose that crop in 3 days. So I think we've been getting a lot more conversational aspects around presumptives. We've been introducing some newer technology around presumptives to help alleviate some of those pain points. But the bigger hurdle is once they do get that presumptive, I would say from the grower's perspective, they now have to go back, trace it back to that specific section of the farm, make sure they section it off. And some people react right away from that initial result to what we call disking it in, which is they bring a tractor with a big disc behind it and they till all that crop into the ground so it doesn't get harvested by accident and or cross contaminate other sections of that farm. So that's kind of their some groups when they act on that initial reaction, that's their first immediate is to go through section off that field. What we're starting to see more commonly is instead of bringing in that disc right away, some groups are now doing investigative sampling, which is pretty neat to see. So instead of just presumptive, disc it, move on, it's presumptive, let's go back, section this off for sure, create those boundaries so that it doesn't get entered on accident, but then further subsection that specific piece of the field and actually try to find what may have caused that presumptive. What's been exciting for us to see is that there has been times where I know most commonly people say you can't find the smoking gun. We've actually found the smoking gun, and that was pretty rewarding to me because historically in my career, when I was on that side of the fence, I did do a lot of this investigative sampling, and it was true. I couldn't find the smoking gun, but I think my approach has been with working with clients on investigative sampling is if you have the time and you're already going to act on that field and you really want to find the root cause, you could try different things like maximize your incubation temperatures instead of pushing towards that minimum to try to get a faster turnaround. We've seen that scenario has helped. And then we've also kind of troubleshot what came into that farm, whether it was equipment, inputs, water sources, and expanded kind of like you do in a facility with environmentals, vectored outwards on the farm, which was a pretty neat practice that helped us troubleshoot and find that smoking gun on a specific incident for one of our clients. So I think the pain point around presumptives still there. I wouldn't say it's not there, but I think people are more appreciating the conversations that happen when they do get into that scenario, and that's kind of what we've been working towards, at least with our clients here. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems kind of disappointing that there's not an alternative use for that crop, but you can kind of understand that no one wants to send harvesting equipment onto a plot that's tested positive because then you cross-contaminate that equipment. But, maybe there's some entrepreneur out there that says, I can take all this waste lettuce and other leafies and maybe I can make a healthy canned soup or something. So you got a terminal kill step in there that you can get some value out of a crop that normally is just plowed under. So tough for the farmers.
Yeah. I think the other point I mentioned earlier is with technology, though, because I'm big on non-food waste as well, and kind of at least my point of view on presumptives, outbreaks, recalls, tying back to a farm is historically when we would test a farm, it was to check for gross contamination. I know there's been a lot of research around some of these outbreaks that have actually taken the amount of people that got ill, did some reverse math on that, calculation, statistics on the serving sizes that they may have consumed of leafy greens that were related to how many people got sick, and then brought that back to the farm of how many heads of lettuce that actually was on a farm. And when you look at it holistically, it ends up being more of sporadic contamination versus gross contamination, meaning if in a field, if you have 20 acres, if all 20 acres had an issue, that'd be gross contamination. Versus, again, doing some of this math and reverse engineering it, we're finding that it's not even it's a small fraction of an acre. It's not even a full acre that we're seeing some of these issues. Not all. There is some gross contamination events, so those scenarios are different. But in the sporadic contamination, going back to food waste, I think this is where technology is starting to play a role, right? So if we talk about STEC, getting a presumptive for STEC and a broad acre tissue sample, 375, you could have picked up one of the gene targets from one portion of the field and another gene target from another different completely head of lettuce, different portion of the field. But because we brought that together in a sample, enriched it, that may have caused that presumptive. But now there's technology that could tell you, is that if are both gene targets coming from the same cell? Is it public health concern? Is it separate? And we're able to identify that with the technology that we have available to us now. And that all goes back to food waste and not discarding a whole acre's worth of product when it came from two small
Hmm.
portions of a field of a head of lettuce. So I think that's pretty neat to see.
Yeah, the farmer is highly motivated not to contaminate their crop, and I think a lot of people forget about that. That the farmer has a huge financial incentive not to do things wrong, but you're also growing ready to eat crop out in the open.
Yeah.
And some people have argued that well, maybe we should do indoor agriculture and solve that problem. But we've also had outbreaks with um, shielded produce crops. So these microbes don't read the books, and they can travel freely wherever they like.
Yeah. My favorite saying is it is an outdoor sport, and I think for me, it's trying to understand, especially with the technology available these days, trying to understand a little bit more about that outdoor sport. Is it prevalent in certain parts of the world, specific growing regions, specific time frames of growing regions? Is it weather related, water related, input related? I think those are opportunities, especially with technology, data collection these days, that we could start to pin down potentially where these risks are certain times of the year.
Mhm. So let's go back to what happens in the labs, and you mentioned the concept of presumptive and confirm. So I guess my question, we don't have to focus it on that, but you have an example of a test that's just really hard for your customers to interpret the results, and maybe kind of go into why they're having a hard time.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, I'll I'll share one piece that's been interesting this last year and a half that we've been dealing with, and it's not necessarily a end result, but it's a result that I've had conversations with clients with, and they were unaware that this was happening. One of the things that we see primarily on tissue products coming from a farm is indeterminates, and indeterminates which are caused by some sort of inhibition. And we've seen it go a couple different ways. I think in verification work, we've seen it on specific crops. So coming from the crop itself, the chemistry, and or that crop's life cycle. So taking a spinach leaf, which is only in the ground for 30 days, versus a broccoli leaf that might be in the ground for 120 days. Just natural microflora on that crop that's out in the environment longer could be causing some sort of inhibition, and or more people going into organic and or regenerative farming that are adding what we call biological or more natural fertilizers versus synthetic fertilizers that have humic acids. We've seen a lot of these, a combination of these in this specific region for leafy greens cause an issue on the PCR instrument, which is inhibition. And so again, it's not a positive, or it's not a detected or not detected result. It's just saying that there's an issue that the PCR machine couldn't fully interpret that result. And so that was a little bit of heartburn we had early on because our industry wasn't aware of that type of issue in the laboratory. And so I would say that we've had a lot of conversations around kind of explain and come up with solutions, whether it's on the front end or the back end of the processing of the sample, that has helped alleviate some of those concerns. So I would say that's been a difficult pain point for us. Other than that, interpreting STEC results, seeing, trying to educate clients on that concept that I mentioned earlier when we look at CT values and seeing the gene targets and seeing um, a negative result actually produce a positive for one of the gene targets, having those conversations with clients that are interested in that and are trying to take their program to another level. Because in my opinion, in my thought process, when you test a farm for STEC, if you don't have any of the gene targets, that's a pretty clean field. But again, being an outdoor sport, being the time of the year that it could be, we start to see quite a bit of gene targets, single gene targets in samples. So we'll see call it in a 20-acre field, we'll see the first 2 acres have an EAE target, the next 7 have nothing, and then that last acre in that farm have a sticks target, and you were one rock throw away from the perfect storm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or potentially the sampler missed the perfect storm himself. It's something that we've been having conversations with industry about, and trying to bring more resolution to that, in the sense of, are you missing it because of your sample pattern? Are you missing it because of, uh, specific risk that might be different between that section of the field? And where it gets to me, is more risk-based testing, right? If you start to see single gene targets, again, in a perfect world, you have no gene targets. In this world, you get some gene targets, in my mind, some level of risk. Again, it's not the perfect storm, but it gives you an opportunity to understand it. And or when you see that perfect storm, which means both gene targets triggering that presumptive, looking at the surrounding area to see if, there was signs of potential risk in other portions of the field, and then making your decisions based off of that, and or taking that for further testing. Like we mentioned, ddPCR is a good option. That's something we've been exploring. There's a new assay that most people are trying in this industry that's called PEC, that it's becoming a more common, I'd say, it's a newer test coming to market where people are trying to understand that whole co-localized piece, and there's a provider that created an assay that can help determine if both of those targets are coming from the same cell. Same thing with ddPCR, just a little bit of different technology. But overall, I think that's a pretty neat opportunity that we see, and having these conversations are definitely helping. So between indeterminates, kind of trying to understand what's more in the farm, what's going on with the farm, and or the commodity, and or understanding STEC a little bit further with technology, or just even having conversations and looking at your initial screen, there's a lot of value there in both of those. And I think when you look at a food safety testing program, that value is already there, and you have access to it. And I think that's something we could continue exploring versus the traditional, more transactional approach to testing, where here's my product, I want my result, and I want it to either say positive or negative. So lots of opportunities around that.
Very cool. I want to pull us back a little bit from kind of the technology stuff and ask you a personal question. So you have the privilege of living and working in Salinas and Yuma, and maybe our audience would be as curious as I am. What are some of the things you like about both of those communities to spend time in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Uh, yeah, I've recently actually had this conversation with a colleague of mine, and I think what I really like about this industry, more specifically this region and Yuma region, it's the relationships over the last 13 years that I've built in this industry. It's a very fast-paced, demanding industry. Like I mentioned, 6, 7 days a week. You got harvest going on 24 hours, depending on the commodity. And so I think a lot of my colleagues just this industry in general, like there's really good people and really good relationships that I've built. And yeah, I mean, the hard work that comes with it has its pros and cons. But I think what I like to see is that community piece, right? Everybody at the end of the day, when there is an issue, food safety issue, weather issue that pertains to the farming areas here, everybody really pulls together as a community. And yeah, I think that's one of the best pieces of living in this valley and working in this industry specifically. And now I thought, when I worked just focused on leafy greens growing, farming, processing, I thought there wasn't another industry that could compare. But then I brought another fast-paced industry of testing two leafy greens, and it ended up being, a good storm. But overall, it's been fun, and that's kind of what I work for or work towards here. Is I've been on that side. I'm now exploring this side. Uh, my background in food safety, my colleagues wanting to share all of this information I'm learning, trying to innovate the process, and getting that feedback from my colleagues, because at the end of the day, they will tell you the truth. And again, it's that relationship piece of this industry that makes us unique, in my opinion. So, does that answer the question, Doug?
Yeah, thanks. Now I'm going to give you a personal question for me, and I want to apologize up front for those people, both the producers and the processors of this product, and that is kale. And I just want to be very frank with you. I really don't like kale.
Yeah.
And so, can you explain to me why humans eat kale?
That's a tough question, and I am not a fan of kale myself, so that's a difficult one for me to answer. What I will say, though, not to go too much on a tangent, is that I had this small phase in my career where I was doing agriculture development and working with a company that had different divisions, different parts of the world. And there was a technology, CRISPR technology, where a company was trying to breed out that pungency in kale and make it sweet kale. And I thought that was pretty brilliant. So I think we're still a couple years out from that, Doug, but it's coming quick. And so when I find that kale, I'll bring it to you, and you can tell me yes or no. I still think it's going to taste bad, but we'll see if we could change your mind.
All right. Well, I appreciate walking amongst fellow colleagues who share the same opinion about a food product. But do you have a favorite way to consume kale if you absolutely positively have to?
Well, kale or any other leafy greens vegetables, I need to eat more of. So I think I consume it the same way as everybody else. I add the best dressing that's out there and just push it through.
Yeah, for me, it's chop finely and put it in a soup,
Oh, there you
and
go.
and don't tell me that it's kale, and then I'll eat it.
That's one way of going about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, it doesn't sound like either one of us is going to be a preacher for kale anytime soon. So,
Yeah. I am interested what's the next superfood, though. I know when that kale hype came out, I had the fortunate opportunity to work for a pretty innovative grower who kind of led seed development, breeding development, variety development for baby kales. So baby kales, I don't know if you've tried baby kales, less stem, less smaller size. Those are not as bad, but overall still has a little bit of that kick. Um,
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you attempting to convert me over to kale. There may be hope for me someday, so I'll stay positive on the commodity. Let's see. From a customer perspective, what kinds of frequently asked questions do you get from both current and aspirational customers? You know, just kind of your interactions with customers. What sorts of questions do they ask?
yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's again different levels, or I say, what's the right way of going about it? There's less sophisticated players and more sophisticated players, and I think everybody has their own level that they're at when it comes to a testing program. And I kind of just gauge that upon initial conversations. And transparently, sometimes it just ends up being a cost question. How much is it going to test? How much is it going to cost me? And how fast am I going to get my results? And sometimes that's just a conversation. It's pricing and result turnaround time.
Hmm.
Then there's some conversations that go a little bit past that of, what are my options? PCR, for example, do you run one platform? Do you run two, three? Can we try different platforms? And then there's the more, I would say, more sophisticated, more exploratory type groups. And I like working with all three groups, but the people that really like to question why, which platforms, which options do they have, what options can they create, which has been something I personally like to do is question the norm and really go into research, innovation, technology. And so I have different levels of conversation every day with different types of clients based on kind of what they're trying to achieve.
Okay, very good. Um, when I look at your businesses, you're running microbiology labs, but you also sell chemistry into this sector. And do you have any insights on, the sorts of things that a fresh leafy grower would be asking Eurofins to do on the chemistry side?
Yeah, I think pesticide residue testing on farms. I think that's been evolving over the last couple of years. Um, I think there's still I would say maybe a little bit less guidance than we have on the micro side for testing farms, and more so when it comes to pesticides. And I'll give one example just from my previous life. Um, when you're testing for a pesticide on the farm, especially here in the Salinas Valley where we get 15, 20 mile per hour winds almost daily, and somebody's spraying uh, north of you and that wind is blowing heading south and your farm's right next to it, there could be some potential for what we call drift or cross contamination really from one spray to another, which there is guidance for that. And for the most part, we have pretty good IPM programs, integrated pest management programs, to help kind of mitigate some of those risks. But when you start to test for it, um, the guidance there gets a little bit more difficult in the sense of if you find it, what do you do? Is it considered an adulterated product or not? More so, if you find a chemical that's not registered for your crop because your neighbor was growing alfalfa or some other commodity and you're growing leafies, gets a little bit difficult there. And then technology. I think from my understanding of chemistry, which is not a whole lot, the amount of compounds that we're now looking for. When you used to test for a couple hundred compound, or a couple probably 100 compounds to 200 compounds. I think the last time I checked, we're at 525 compounds. And so just doing that many different types of chemicals that you could find in an outdoor sport, windy area that could pop up. I think the guidance there is still um, not too clear. And I think our industry is shifting to try to understand that a little bit more. So I would say to the original question of chemistry testing in produce, I think pesticide residues is going to be definitely an uptick in these next couple of years.
Okay. So in the Salinas Valley, they grow other things besides lettuce. Do you get other kinds of produce samples into the lab?
No, there is a lot of vineyards here, but a lot of these labs, a lot of these vineyards, where they're producing the wine, the wineries, they'll have their own internal labs. Sometimes we'll do some quality testing for them at a different, not so much your daily checks, but just what's the word I'm looking for? It's not authenticity. It's I want to say it's similar to potency, just basically screening for all the different levels, and that's why I'm not too familiar with grapes, but just basically proving out how strong or how uh, neat that wine really is. So I guess going back to the question, yeah, there's vineyards. There's also some orchards in the hillsides. There's a lot of avocado growing here in the valley. There's a lot of apples, lemons, citrus. Let's see. There's a lot of olives slightly north of us. Some crops that are, depending on how you want to classify them, not leafies, maybe artichokes is one. Brussels sprouts, grow a lot of Brussels sprouts. There is some tomato production around this area, but I would say majority of it still falls in the Salinas Valley. And the reason why they call us the salad bowl of the world is leafy greens.
It's a good place to grow leafies.
Yep.
When you think about testing in the leafy space and production areas, do we get much competition from other parts of the world on importing leafies, or is the shelf life just so limited that isn't much of an opportunity for exporters?
Yeah, I think the answer that you just said, Doug, the short shelf life makes it difficult to try to get leafies to other parts of the world. In my experience, I know Spain has a pretty good growing cycle of leafies. Um, Mexico has certain growing regions as well. But when it comes to the sheer scale of how much we're farming leafies here, um, I haven't seen anything as comparable to what we do here. And I want to combine two regions when I talk about leafy greens productions in the U.S. And relative to why my labs are where they're at. So the way that the growing season works here for leafies in California, it's basically from March through November, maybe early December, that crops can grow really well here. Leafy greens can grow really well here in Salinas. And then for the other time frame from basically October through April, a lot of these growers have land or operations in another part of the U.S., which is Yuma, Arizona, which is southwest corner of Arizona, where the climate there in the wintertime does not get cold enough to freeze over the crop. So a lot of the growers and operations from here, Salinas Valley, move down there for the season to grow. And combined, I would say they probably make up 80 to 85% of the leafy green supply in the U.S. and even Canada and Mexico as well. There is smaller growing regions within the U.S. that have their smaller time slots. So I mentioned about a 10-month, 8-month time slot here in Salinas Valley. I know Florida has a small production season, Colorado, Idaho, Washington, and some of these other states, but it's not as big of a growing region. So I'd say that probably makes up for about 10 to 15%. And that small 5%, there is some production that we import from Mexico and or Canada. So that's kind of my understanding of the landscape here. And again, globally, I'm just familiar with Spain from my previous life. We used to farm out there in Spain, but that's as much as my knowledge goes around leafy greens productions elsewhere.
Yeah, I think people are kind of surprised when they think about California agriculture, about all they think about is the Central Valley and how hot it gets in the summer
Yeah,
and how difficult it would be to grow leafies there in
yeah,
the summer. Very
yeah.
good.
And that's one thing. When I stepped into this role, I'll be transparent about when they told me, "Hey, you're going to support the produce segment for Eurofins." I was thinking, "Great, I know leafy greens pretty well," and that conversation quickly went to, "No, no, we're not talking just leafies. We're talking the whole produce category." So we consider now produce verticals, different verticals. There's so much more out there than just leafy greens, and like you said, Central Valley, stone fruits. There's a lot of melon production. Um, yeah, just different types of apples, cherries, so forth and so forth, peaches, and the list goes on. Onions, cucumbers, which is also making some headlines these last couple of years. So just the overall produce segment, and sometimes I have to remove myself from just when people are talking produce, defaulting to leafy greens and starting to expand into some of those other produce verticals. Well, yeah.
So, where do you see testing going in this space? Just put your future cap on, and if you had a wish list, or if you actually are prescient enough to know what the future looks like, go ahead and give us a few little speculative thoughts on that.
Yeah. So again, the way my gears turn, that entrepreneur itch or that just innovative thought process doesn't go away. Makes it difficult to sleep sometimes because I just hyper focus on problems and trying to create solutions. And one thing you know, exposing myself into this testing world, I always try to keep that same mindset
Excuse me.
and going back to the farm of, what would make the farmer's life easier, and then trying to understand why we do things the way we do things. And my biggest bone to pick right now is the way that we do pre-harvest testing. So if I had a magic wand, or in my perfect world, like you mentioned, Doug, I think the way that we collect tissue samples is not uniform. It's very labor intensive. You have to pay somebody to go out to a farm every single day and walk miles upon miles. I tracked myself once when I was in those shoes, and I did about 13.4 miles in one day just collecting tissue samples, walking row by row, bending over, picking leaf by leaf into a bag, and then delivering it to the lab. So again, I think there's an opportunity there, to maybe get away from tissue samples, and it's proven in other industries. The meat industry moved away, to what they call microtallies, or a swab type or cloth type of sample collection, which I think would help create more consistency in field sampling and leafy greens and produce in general. And then that would alleviate some of the hurdles that we have at the laboratory. And so if you're able to bring in a uniform sample through the door every single time, we know how much media we got to prepare. It would be a lot less media than a whole 375-gram sample, because a cloth that could be equally representative wouldn't need as much. And something that we haven't discussed in this, and I know we're coming up to time, but if anybody's interested, there's been a technology I've been exploring that is concentration technology. I've been using it for rapid turnarounds, so concentrating a sample, which would reduce down your incubation time, to produce a faster turnaround time for my clients. But more recently, I found another application that would keep the rapid turnaround effect, but allow us to potentially process samples differently to make the cost of testing a little bit more effective, to be able to implement more, either more testing on a farm, and still give you everything else that the client's been asking for. So kind of to take that back a little bit, when I have conversations with clients, again, not all clients, some clients, it still comes down to they want the cheapest price, the fastest turnaround time, and the best technology available. And so, again, perfect world, magic wand. I think if we can get away from tissue sampling to a more consistent type of sample, which could be a microtally, using concentration technology to get you a faster turnaround time and a lower price point, and then being able to run on different platforms, maybe your initial screen on PCR, and then allowing either PAC or ddPCR to come into play to give you more data behind your sample. I think that's going to be the future, and I think that's something I'm actively working towards. So I'd love to get feedback, thoughts on that. I have the framework for it. I really think it's the future in the sense of meeting industries where they're at, what their needs are, and then just adding more value to their testing program. So that's kind of what I've been working on actually these last 6 to 8 months, and it's pretty exciting to see some of the results being produced from this type of processing of a farm's product sample through our labs.
Well, one of the privileges I have is to be able to work with thinkers and brilliant people who work hard and bring solutions to our customers. So all that was very much music to my ears. Maybe to finish us off today, Rafael, could you maybe just comment on, what are some of the things you like about working within the Eurofins environment, and uh, just address, why you continue doing what you're doing for Eurofins?
Absolutely. I guess similar to what I mentioned about the leafy greens industry is the people I've met in our network has been really a pleasure working with, yeah, a broad group of, you name it, yourself, CSOs, technicals, BUMAs, uh, all across. We have a really, really unique group in our organization, and networking with them has been a privilege, which is one of the things I've been excited about working here. The other half is the entrepreneur piece. I think when Eurofins acquired my business and said continue doing what you're doing, I thought that was just going to be some line, and then a couple weeks in, I'd start to fall under a corporate structure. But honestly, they've given me full autonomy to run my business the way it needs to be run to service our industry. And so I ran this company, or this business unit, these business units, I should say, like a produce company. One thing we do, just like the produce industry, is because we have similar clients in both locations, our core team moves with the business. So as our clients move from California to Arizona, so do we. I go down there, we all pack up a suitcase and we go down there for a couple months, and then we come back when the season's back here. And so, again, I think we got a lot of questions because it wasn't traditional to some of the framework that we have here. But again, the autonomy to be the entrepreneur and run the business the way that it needed to be ran to service this industry has been very motivating to me. And so the combination of those two things is what I look forward to when I come to work at Eurofins.
Very good. So, as you know, most of Eurofins employees work very hard and long hours. What do you like to do when you have like a couple of hours of free time?
That's a great question. Probably the most difficult one to answer in this whole interview. But no, I like to be a dad. I like to hang out with my kids and you know go do whatever they want to do. Whether that's luckily I have some adventurous kids, so camping, hiking, uh, off roading, just exploring in general. So when I have the time, I try to focus whatever time I have to them.
Very good. Rafael, it is a privilege for me to work with you. I've watched your progress in the Eurofins umbrella for a couple of years now, and have been impressed with where you're going. And I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you today, and look forward to many more. So, Scott,
Likewise.
I think we'll close this one off today, and I appreciate everyone's interest in watching this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.